This video is going to cover the Photoshop sequence of the animatic assignment. It'll go all the way down to step 6 here, just before the end, or just before we get to After Effects. So it's going to also cover the idea of creating that project directory, which the previous video covered. So I've already done that. I've created, or I downloaded the project directory template from Canvas. I renamed it Animatic. Now you're going to want to name it your last name underscore first name underscore animatic. Now that you've done that, got to see where I put it right there. You open it up and you have your base directories. These top directories are going to be your base directories. And go ahead and drop in your creative brief and your storyboard. And you might want to start an updated text file, and this will be an ongoing file. So from there, we're going to open up the storyboard inside of Photoshop, and here's the storyboard I'm going to be working with. And you can see it's simply a scanned storyboard. I took the page that it was drawn on, and I actually used a photocopier to scan it and email it to myself. Now that's all fine and good, but there's going to be some issues with it that are acceptable for this class. On a professional level, this would not be acceptable. But I'm going to go to image size, and you can see that this was scanned at 2122 by 1659. Now, and that's at 300 dpi, so it has some pixels to work with. But each of these frames is going to get scaled up to one of your finished resolutions. I'll show you that here. The finished resolutions are either going to be 1280 by 720 or 1920 by 1080, and that depends on several factors. You can work in either of these formats or resolutions, but like I said in an earlier video, I believe it was module 1 or 0 and 1 actually, if you're using a low-end computer, a laptop, something that really wasn't designed for graphics, then I highly recommend that you use this setting. All right. Now, if you are on a gaming machine with lots of RAM and a higher-end graphics card, by all means, you're free to use a full 1080p resolution. But these are what we're going to be scaling each of these frames to. And if I look at, just quickly, I create a bounding box here. Nope, my bounding box is constrained, so I don't want to do that. I can see the width and height information. You probably can't read it on the video, but it's 676 wide by 455-ish pixels high. And that has to be scaled up to one of the two resolutions. And when I scale it up, it's going to become pixelated. So that'll work for the animatic and for this example and for you for this class. However, usually I will draw my storyboards using a full 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. That way I have a full sheet to scan in per frame, and I have the resolution that I need to bring into my video compositing applications. So with that in mind, I first started off, I usually will show my rules, and I like showing my rules in pixels versus inches or picas or whatever. You can change those settings here, but I almost always work in pixels. And I click, hold, and drag to bring down a guide. And what I've already done with this is I have squared it off. Just made sure that the horizontal and vertical edges are not warped or twisted. They're in line with each other. I don't need to rotate it. I've cleaned up the core storyboard. And from here, what I'm going to simply do is I'm going to create a series of guides that outline the frames horizontally. And then I'm going to do the same for the verticals. And this creates an easy situation to create marquees to basically crop out each of these elements. So there, and it wouldn't be a bad idea, it'd be a very good idea actually, to zoom in. You can see my accuracy is a little bit sloppy there. But as long as things are aligned, we can lose a pixel or two, at least in this exercise, and not be penalized for it. So there, here, and then one at the very end. And I'm going to zoom back out. I'm just going to double check. You see, some of these are a little bit more cropped than others, so it's okay to have a little, like over here you can see I've got a little bit of white space between my guide and the frame. That's fine. I can work with that. Ideally, we'd want to tighten this up, and maybe I will. I'll just go to my move tool and grab that guide and just pinch it in a pixel. Okay. You might find it easier to go under your views and turn off snapping. That way you can just freeform your guide placement. I'm going to scroll up a little bit and find a happy medium here. Right there, I think, is good. So I think I'm happy with what I've developed here. Here I'm going to be cropping out a little bit, but no big deal. So that's essentially what I end up with. Now, there's different workflows for this. This just happens to be one of the workflows. And that's what's being covered. Let's see here. That's what we're covering. You can see here I've scanned the storyboards in, brought them into Photoshop. And I say lower resolutions are fine in most cases. What you don't want to do is take 20 frames and take a picture with your phone. It's simply not going to have the resolution that is even acceptable for this assignment. But here is what you just saw in Photoshop. And now I'm going to be moving over to step 2. So again, there's different ways. I may slightly deviate from the lesson here a little bit in the video because I'm just freewheeling it. I'm not going line by line through the lesson here. But really what I'm going to do is I'm going to be creating 8 separate frames. And let me bring Photoshop up again. So what I do is I'll simply go File, Save As. And in this case, again, I'm working in iterations. I don't want to save over my original one, so I'm going to save it as 002, storyboard underscore 002. Notice I'm putting it in the Documents folder because well, actually, no, I don't want to put it in the Documents folder. Please excuse me on that. I'm actually going to put this in the Working folder, and as you can see, I've started to do that already, but I'm just going to save this right into the Working folder. I don't want to include this when I submit it for class. This is just me working out and breaking out each of the individual frames into their separate files. So by saving that, though, my process is relatively simple. I'm going to use the crop tool, and cropping can be destructive, so ultimately I don't want to save off or save over the 002 because I'm going to crop this first frame out, save it as a different file, and then I'm going to reopen storyboard 002. Now I could do it different ways. I could grab my marquee tool here, and this is actually where you want to turn your snaps back on because that'll snap right to the guide very nicely. And then I could go Control C to copy, Control N for a new Photoshop document. That's going to create, I'm just going to use the clipboard here, and you can see this is the resolution of that clipboard. So I hit create, and that creates a new document over here, and I can just hit Control V. That's a little bit, I have to add, this creates more steps for me because I get a background layer I don't have to, but ideally I'm going to delete. It just creates a sloppy workflow if I don't. And then I can go File, Save As. That's another way of doing it. I'm not going to save that off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the crop tool. And again, snaps are on. And I'm going to snap to the guides. And I guess part of the reason why I like this particular workflow is it grays out the other boards. And it allows me really to kind of focus in on this. I hit Enter to end the operation. And I go File, Save As. Save As, very important. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually save these out as individual frames. You can see I've already done that here. So frame 1, this is going to be frame 1. So I do that, and I would hit Save. I'm not going to actually do it because I've already done that already. And I'm not going to take video time to go through each of these. And I'm going to hit Save. Now you're going to want to name these appropriately. I talked in the previous one of the previous videos that you don't want to name your stuff generically, but these are storyboard frames. It may have been better had I named this, say, storyboard underscore frame underscore 001. That probably would have been a little bit better, but considering the brevity of this assignment, I'm really just talking storyboards here. If this was going to be fed into a larger project with many more documents, I'd be more specific in my naming conventions. So I'll save this off, and I'll close this, and it's important that you hit No here. I do not want to save this. I can go File then, and Open Recents, and bring that storyboard, the full storyboard up again, and then I can crop out the second frame. And basically I'm going to rinse and repeat this process until I have all of these cut out into separate files. And let me show you that here. So in my Animatic folder, that's what I use the working folder for. So in my own process here, I saved it off as frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, 4, etc. I also put that SVG, which is a vector-based logo for Jeep. And this is where I had just a moment ago saved my second storyboard. I'll talk about this file in a moment here. But what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these files and load them up as layers into this file. So I'm going to take a moment actually and just open this up while I'm here. I'm going to say don't crop in this case because I'm pretty much done. I'm going to basically crop these out, and then I can simply close this file out. So here, as you can see with this particular file, each of these frames is loaded, and as I turn off the visibility of each layer, you can see that each of the frames have been established here. So before I actually get to that phase though, I'm going to close this off. I'm going to close this off. And in here, and I'll look at this in list view, these are the files that I had just saved off. Once you get to this point, then what we want to do is open up Photoshop and make sure that we don't have to make sure, but really just it's easier if you have a blank canvas, nothing, no other open documents. And if you go to File and you go to Scripts, in here we have load files into a stack, and this is just a script that does a particular function. It automates things, not unlike an action in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this script to automatically load up all my files into one Photoshop document, but these 8 files that I'm working with are going to be layers now. So I'm going to say use files, browse, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all 8 frames that I had just cropped out. You can see the list is down here. And I click open, and that loads them up here. And I double check. There's frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You want to make sure, because sometimes you might be missing a frame. So if I went 3, 5, 6, 7, it's gonna miss one of the crucial layers for your project. So now for most of you, you're just going to want to leave it like this, and you're going to want to hit OK. All right, and I'm going to do it a little differently because I created my storyboard slightly different. I'm going to actually just do this, and I'm going to say, okay, attempt to align automatically align the source images. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. I'm just going to do this operation. So I click OK with that. Now again, I want to be clear. You probably don't want to be doing this with the way that you freehanded your storyboards. You're going to want to manually align them. If you want to play with this function, by all means, feel free, but you may find that it actually makes the alignment worse. It really just kind of depends. So what it does now is it opens up each of those files, and it copies them, and as you can see, it's jumping. There's the open frame, and there's pasting it into a layer on this document here. And you can see the layers are growing here, and it takes the name of the file and names the layer accordingly. So we're almost done here, and in fact we are done. And here, the first frame, it put it in order. So there's frame 1, there's 2, 3, 4, and you're starting, as you toggle these off in a certain rhythm, you kind of get the feel of the animatic and what's happening. But there are some problems, first and foremost, and there are some conditions that we're going to want to work with editing. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the alignment before moving forward. So the way I created this overall is I created the background and the midground in one drawing. I then drew out the Jeep and just positioned it in a layer, and then moved that layer down for different frames. So the registration of the volcano and the horizon line, I'll come back up over here, the horizon line, all of this background here doesn't change. The only part that changes is the volumetric effect of the volcano exploding. Because I created this in that way, I know I'm going to get solid alignment between all of my frames because I'm basically using the same image throughout all my frames from start to finish in this. You may not be. And if this was a different type of, or a different story, and it didn't have, maybe I do a cut shot from here to the inside of a store. I can't expect Photoshop to logically align those photos. So please understand that, and you might have to do some manual aligning between these to make sure that they're grouped and aligned appropriately. But mine align very well to each other. Because they're aligned accordingly, and once they're aligned, now that they're aligned, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to go to Image. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to crop this. I'm going to clean up these white edges. There, make sure my snap is turned off again. And top. And you'll notice on a few frames, I'm basically trimming off part of the frame. And in certain cases, I'm leaving some white space. That's totally acceptable. And I'm happy with my results. I lock it in. I double check to make sure that the core information of my storyboards are in fact within frame and I'm not losing any critical data. And we're pretty good here. Now you can see I'm zoomed in at 177%. I'm going to zoom, that's 100%. And this is not an acceptable resolution. Let me go to image size. You can see that each of these frames now are 689 by 456. And that's not going to be the best or most acceptable resolution for me, even though they're at 300 ppi. This is the full scale of my dimensions of this document. These are the number of pixels, period, no matter what my PPI is. So, because I scan this in, it's at 300 PPI. This is saying 300. Now I want to use these pixels, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck resample, and you can see that that locks the width and the height and the resolution, and I'm going to change this to 72. Notice it didn't change my finished piece here, or my finished dimensions. It really is just telling the pixels to be reused. I'll change this to inches. So when I had this at 300, you could see that each of these frames, it's at 2 point something inches by 1 point something inches. By going to pixels, whoop, I have to actually change this to 72 and click on resample. You can see it changed my width and height dimensions in inches, but because I did that, I can actually go back to pixels now. You got to have resample checked to change over to pixels. But my overall dimensions did not change. So I'm just showing you that for now. And what I want to do is increase the resolution to an acceptable resolution here. So the acceptable resolutions, going back to the assignment, and I think for this I am going to, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to go 20 or 1280 by 720. So my width is going to be 1280. And I actually want to uncheck the height here by 720. Now that's going to distort my image. I didn't draw these at a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And the 16 by 9 aspect ratio is why that's the width to height ratio that you drew your storyboards in. So you had an advantage. This is old artwork. So here I've got this going on, and I'll leave it at 72. And I'm using resampling, but I actually am going to be scaling this up. So Automatic is going to work very good for you, and really what Automatic is doing, because I'm scaling up and it knows I'm scaling up, it is going to do a bicubic enlargement. Now I'm going to just keep this at Automatic just to make sure that I'm reinforcing what I believe you should be doing. But I'm using Automatic, and if I click OK, it's going to take a moment to process, but it takes all of these layers and it gives me my final resolution. So now when I go to image size, it's 1280 by 720 at 72 ppi. And that's exactly the resolution we need for for After Effects. The only exception is for those students that are going to be working in a full 1080p. You're going to be basically needing to change the resolution to 1920 by 1080. The same idea, the same application. It's just that these two numbers will be changed. So I've already done that. I have this. And now I'm going to zoom in here so you can see the artifacts of a low resolution image that's been scaled up. And then that's not a very pretty sight to be looking at. But like I said, that's going to work out fine for us. All of my frames are sequentially ordered, nice and neat. I might decide that to get some more pop overall in the look, I might just play with my levels. Here's my levels, and I'm going to take this is my black point, my midtones, and my highlights. So white point, gray point, and black point or shadow, midtone, and highlight. And I'm going to simply bring that over here to reflect where really the majority of my black data is starting. My white data, that's pretty populated. This graph here, it has plenty of pixel information in the white area, but I'm going to move this off to the side. As I play with my midtone here, you'll see some pretty drastic changes going on in the image. When I move the black point, you're not seeing a whole lot of change going on in there. But when I start moving this, it's not updating for me. Well, you should be seeing some kind of a change going on in here. And it's just not showing up. I think it might be a conflict with the video capture software that's playing out, although I'm not entirely sure why. But if I click OK here, I should see some kind of overall result there. Oops, I know what I did wrong. I'm going to undo that operation, edit, step back. Oh, I already undid the levels. What happened was I had this frame selected, my bad. I'm going to grab all of these frames. And nope, it's not going to let me do the levels. I'll have to do that one at a time. So another way of doing this is actually through an adjustment layer. So here I can actually, down at the bottom here, I have adjustment layers. I can go to my levels and I can play with them here. It's basically the same graph, and now you're seeing that happen inside the frame here. So I can play with my midtones. See how rich or contrasty that's becoming? That can actually help sell my image. And this is actually a non-degrading operation. So I'm going to pull my properties window off here and just shorten it up or trim it up a little bit. Go back to my layers tab. There you can see that this is my adjustment layer, and I can toggle that on and off. I'm going to close this window. See, that's with it off and that's with it on, and it's going to apply to every single layer below this. So adjustment layers are really the way to go with this, and you can see how much more saturated this object is, and that's going to help overall your animatic read. It's not required, and you can see right there I'm toggling those adjustments, that level adjustment on and off. So you can Google adjustment layers and learn a lot more about all of these adjustment layers and how they operate in Photoshop if you haven't learned them in other classes already. So now that I have this, and I am actually going to turn that off for this operation and get rid of it. It's an extra step, and the truth of the matter is I can actually do this inside of After Effects. So I'm just giving you some base ideas on different ways and different workflows overall. Try to stick to simplicity here. Unless you are really an intermediate to expert image manipulator and Photoshop user, and or After Effects user, follow more to my lesson. It's going to save you headaches and debug time, because if I left that in, it's going to create some extra complexity when I import this into Photoshop. So really what I've done here is I've adjusted everything. It's basically finished, and I can now import this into After Effects once I save this off. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and that's what I called my stacked frames. So I created a single Photoshop file here with all of these layers, and I called it Stacked Frames. And I hit Save. I'm not going to do that because I've already done it. And that's the end of the Photoshop portion of this lesson. So what we've covered is we started off with our project directory. That's this part. We entered into Photoshop and we cut out our frames. We did some basic adjustments to them and alignments, and we saved out each of those frames from the storyboard as individual files. We then stacked them into a single file. Accordingly, adjusted the resolution, and we saved it off in our graphics import folder as a stacked file. Now again, that's one way of working. This is going to save us time, and I'll come back to this when we get inside of After Effects, but that is the Photoshop part of this lesson.